Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first edition of the Pit Limiter podcast. I am one of your hosts, Zach Buchanan. Joining me, as always, Victor Valley and Zach Campbell. Say hi, fellas.
What's up?
How's it going?
We're here to talk about motorsports every single week. I'm from Wapakoneta, Ohio, 21 years old. I am an avid kart racer. I plan to go back to college for mass communications. Vic, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yep, I'm 20 years old. Currently going to college for IT support. Former kart racer myself, and sometimes I take sim racing a little bit too serious.
Don't we all? Zach
Right.
Campbell, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm 16 years old. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I drive for Apex Racing UK on the iRacing side of things.
Awesome. Great. Let's dive right into it, fellas. This first segment is called Stop and Go. We're going to dive right into it. Zach Campbell, what do you got for us?
Well, I got Queensland is under final consideration for allocating funding for the IndyCar return to the Gold Coast, and if all goes well, that's expected to drop by February of 2020.
Derek Daly has filed a $25 million lawsuit against Wish TV over reporting about Bob Lamy's racial slur. This is reported across many social media mediums. This was over a racial slur that took place over 30 years ago.
Arco and Menards announced today a multi-year extension, elevating the Menards company from a presenting sponsor to the title sponsor. Effective immediately, this is a multi-year deal.
IndyCar tested at Laguna Seca over the weekend, and it actually ended up being the Carlin cars on top. Max Chilton led the test with RC Anderson second, as drivers complained a lack of grip all around the track for the first time that IndyCars have been there since 2004.
Dr. Robert Hubbard, inventor of the Hans device, has passed away.
Ben Keating will be fielding the first Ford GT as a privateer this year for the 2019 Le Mans 24-hour endurance event.
So that's just a little bit of an appetizer on what you're going to see for the rest of this episode. Let's dive into IndyCar. First topic, Patricio O'Ward, Indy Lights champion from the 2018 season, was signed last year with Harding Racing, which became Harding Steinbrenner Racing. He had his scholarship of $1 million from the Road to Indy program that he was bringing into this season. Since then, it was announced that he would be leaving Harding Steinbrenner Racing in a mutual agreement to go elsewhere and see what he can do with his opportunity. Fellas, this is a big breaking story because the top driver of the Road to Indy last year, as of right now, does not have a ride.
Yeah, that's right. And, personally, I believe Pato O'Ward's probably the most shining talent of this rookie class this year. He performed extremely well for Harding last year, Indy number 8 at Sonoma, and showed a lot of promise in Indy Lights, lacking that championship a race early. So, very unfortunate to see this.
Now, this is a quote that was released from O'Ward himself. The Harding Steinbrenner Racing Team supported my decision to seek a new opportunity by releasing me from my contract and allowing me the opportunity to find a new team before the start of the 2019 season. Now I am fully focused on finding the right opportunity and how I will use my scholarship from Indy Lights for 2019. Now, there was a lot of rumblings about this in the past week, that there wasn't enough funding, that they potentially didn't have an engine lease yet, and they were just waiting to get that. That's not something that was confirmed, but that was something that was rumored. And there was also questions, why Colton Herta over Patricio O'Ward? And then you also look at the connections from Colton Herta to the Steinbrenner family, which, more or less kind of confirms why Colton Herta is staying and Patricio O'Ward doesn't have a ride right now.
Yeah, and I don't think this is much of a surprise. There have been rumblings around the paddock for probably the last month or so now, actually, that Harding is really bitten off more than they could chew with trying to get 2 engine leases together, field 2 full-time cars, and even with Andretti's support, it was going to be a hard task for a team. It's really kind of developed this theme of biting off more than they could chew. I mean, we saw it last year with Gabby Chavez and trying all of a sudden to hire all these drivers towards the end of the season. I know Santi Urrutia tweeted out today that Mike Harding approached him about signing him and being teammates with Gabby Chavez later in the year. And from a team which has been going through financial troubles, even going back to April of last year, and really ending up within this whole McLaren situation that happened last year, where they were very, very close to getting bought out by McLaren. And it was really too much of a step, and I think that really did, what came out today really proved that. And I find it, interesting that motorsport.com, they reported earlier today that Pato O'Ward actually left the team. He wasn't released from the contract, but apparently the team had told him they had an engine lease for him, and that turned out to be untrue, and that came to light within the last week, and, Pato rightly took his money somewhere else.
Now, I think it's worth pointing out, Harding Racing's, which is now Harding Steinbrenner Racing, their burst onto the IndyCar scene was rather large. I mean, when they ran part-time in 2017 with Gabby Chavez, it made a pretty big impact. They only ran the speedway races, put together some pretty decent finishes. They weren't seeing the results they thought they would see in 2018 as a full-time team for the first time. Put Connor Daly in the car for a couple races, and then for Sonoma, we saw Patricio O'Ward and Colton Herta side by side. They ran two cars. Patricio O'Ward put the car in the Fast Six in his first IndyCar start, which is insane. I really think he's the best driver to come out of the road to Indy since Joseph Newgarden, and I mean that. Pure talent.
Yeah, and I really and honestly, I had him picked for Rookie of the Year this year, even over someone like Marcus Ericsson. I really think the kid has the talent, and I really thought with Andretti's support that he could do so much this year, and it's such a shame to see it come out and end like this.
Right. Now, if we're thinking, okay, where can he end up? I mean, less than a month away from the season opener. Where can he end up? Where can he end up? I mean, Carlin Racing maybe, but I don't even know if that's a possibility right now, because there's a potential that it could be just Charlie Kimball and R.C. Enerson in that second car. Surely Carlin wouldn't put out that third car unless there was funding for it.
Yeah, that's right. And, of course, Pato does have that Road to Indy scholarship, so it could be possible he may use that to segue into that Carlin ride. But we don't have any idea right now. And, with the situation he has, only being a month away from the drop of the green flag for the 2019 IndyCar season, his prospects look really bleak, unfortunately.
I think one thing we should point out is if you're looking at what team that he could potentially end up with, no matter the extent of what team he ends up with, you got to imagine he's going to be wanting to race in May at the Indy 500. So if you base it just on the Indy 500, you got to look at what teams are going to have openings for the 500. What teams are maybe going to want to add a car just for somebody like Patricio O'Ward, even if it's just for Indy or just for a couple races. I don't know. I mean, Penske, no. Ganassi, possibly, but I don't know if they'd have the means to do that or would really care to do that. Andretti, they've already stated that they're running 5 cars. You've got Carlin, who knows what they're doing. I think it's fair to say that maybe they've bitten off more than what they can chew, because they've got the funding issue with the second car, Charlie Kimball and whoever else ends up in that car. So they've got somebody splitting the ride there. Juncos Racing, who knows what's going on with them. You've got Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan. They've got the 2 full-time drivers of Sato and Rahal. Then you've also got Jordan King running the 500. There's just not a lot of opportunities out there, unfortunately, for Pato O'Ward. So there's a lot's going to have to happen in the next month if we want to see him in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, and I know that Robin Miller today wrote a good piece on Racer.com and actually suggested that O'Ward is shopping for 5 or 6 races, and suggested that maybe a few starts might end up coming with Andretti, which I could definitely see. Other than that, I know that today Junco's finally confirmed Kyle Kaiser was going to run at Circuit of the Americas. Sponsor stepped up for him. So that's going to be something very interesting to watch, but I think it's going to be hard pressed. I think outside of Carlin had talked about a third entry full time later last year. I know that was before Charlie Kimball's personal sponsor started backing out funding. But I think it's going to be hard pressed for him to find a full-time ride, and I think 5 or 6 races might end up actually being very generous, which is just, it's such a shame because I really and honestly believe that he is one of the best rookies in IndyCar today, and he could end up being one of the best rookies ever.
Right. And I think it's a good lead in to our next topic. The 23 car for Carlin Racing. RC Enerson tested that car at Laguna Seca. We did a little bit of digging, and this isn't something we can confirm, obviously, but just looking at IndyCar.com's site, it has RC Enerson listed as the driver of the number 23 car. That's most likely just because he tested the car. One could presume that, maybe we'll see him in the 23 car for the races that Charlie Kimball isn't in the car. We don't know that for sure. It's been a strong rumor, and he looked good at the Laguna test, so you never know. That's something to definitely keep an eye on in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and that's right. And he's also going to be testing the car for Carlin at Circuit of the Americas for spring training, of course. We already know that R.C. Enerson's father does have a good bit of money. If we remember back to, I think it was 2016 or 2017, when Enerson bounced around from a couple of teams, went from Indy Lights over to Dale Coyne's team. His father definitely put up the money for those opportunities for RC, so it's very likely he has the funding.
Yeah, and I think Enerson would be a good choice. The drive he put together for, the revolving door coin car at
Mid-Ohio.
It was actually at Watkins Glen in 2016, where he put together and he finished 9th. That was honestly a great drive from him, and I don't think he ever got a fair shot, and I'm really excited to see that if he ends up with this ride, exactly what he can do, because that's him running 12 races this year. And I really do think that gives him a great chance to shine. And I know it's a rain-shortened test, but, being able to put up good times at Laguna Seca and consistent times and not spin off when people like Zach Veach and Will Power did during that test, I think it really shows that that he could do well.
Right. That test was mired by rain, but it was, I think, a good indicator of what we could see at Laguna Seca and for the 2019 season. Now let's jump in to Speed Weeks. I think it's what really everybody's been wanting to talk about ever since it kicked off at the beginning of last weekend. NASCAR in ARCA at the World Center of Racing in Daytona. Saturday night we had the ARCA Racing Series, which is now the ARCA Menards Series. Harrison Burton took home the victory. And what else can you say other than it was probably the best race of Speed Week so far somehow, even though it wasn't necessarily stellar. It just was really Toyota dominance.
You're not setting the bar very high there for best race of Speed Weeks, though. Not one bit. But yeah, I mean, it was not the typical ARCA race. They made it very clean. I think new green flag or green white checker, whatever they have now.
White checkered, I think.
Yeah,
what you could call it.
Yeah, it contributed to that, to where they didn't have to run the last lap 27 times.
Right. That was a good move, I think, by them too.
Yeah, I think last year when the last 2 laps took an hour and 15 minutes, I think it was to do. That's when it gets a little far. Mm-hmm. And the same thing basically happened at Talladega. So I'm really glad to see they made that change. And I mean, it wasn't the most enjoyable race in the world, but it was one that, just kind of kept me engaged.
Right.
Yeah, and one thing I can take away from it is, although it was a lot of single file racing, we did see Brandon McReynolds and Todd Gilliland make their way through the field late in the going. And I think that was one of the more exciting moments so far of Speed Weeks. And a lot of people
No, I
think
didn't.
a lot of people didn't realize that was going to happen. No one
Right.
actually thought that was going to happen.
I didn't realize this until the race, but ARCA had a rule in place where you were not allowed to lock bumpers. I believe they were just incorporating a NASCAR rule, considering NASCAR now owns ARCA. Not allowed to lock bumpers when you're bump drafting somebody. You're allowed to push. You can't lock bumpers and consistently push, though. And I was surprised by that. I think we could have seen a lot more passing if they were allowed to, because, yet, like you said, Todd Gillen locked onto the back bumper of Brandon McReynolds and pushed him past a couple cars before he wrecked him, and then he ended up, I believe, pushing Harrison Burton to the victory.
Yeah, that's right.
The Stock Car Invitational, the 2020 Stock Car Invitational, which is the combination efforts of the K&N Pro Series East and West and the ARCA Series. NASCAR recently announced the format for that, the kind of tracks, which I'm going to use this loosely. It's tentative, so they're subject to change. The format for the 4 championships, the Pro Series and the East Series both get 6 races. We've got the Stock Car Invitational, which is 10 races, a mile or under, and then the Elite Series, which is essentially the Menards ARCA Series, 10 races at mile plus track. The schedule for what you're going to see for that kind of concerned me a little bit, because they add the Vegas dirt track, which the K&N race was not impressive at all. They added Bristol. They've added Iowa, but they've taken out tracks like Toledo, Berlin, Elko, DuQuoin. I don't know, man. I'm very skeptical with NASCAR now owning ARCA. Who's to say we're just going to see another truck series essentially?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's one of the things that I'm looking at. And then if you look at the tracks that are on the mile plus side, they're adding Dover and Loudon to the mix. That's very concerning. And, if you're taking away DuQuoin and you're moving in Dover and Loudon in place of those tracks, I don't agree with that personally. Nope. And I don't agree with the move to go to the Las Vegas dirt track either. I don't think that was a very good race at all. If you're going to want to do a dirt race, why not bring them to Eldora? Tony Stewart always knows how to prep the track right, and I think that was one of the big downfalls of the Las Vegas dirt race last year, was the track just was not properly prepped.
They even said in a news release that they don't water that track throughout the year because it costs too much. I don't know the exact numbers or the exact scenario, but I know that they did say because it costs so much that they don't prep it as much as they should, and it showed because track was breaking up, it was all dusty, you couldn't see anything, and then they tried putting water on top of it, which made it even worse. So I really hope, this second chance is kind of a wake-up call for the Vegas dirt track that, hey, maybe we should do a better job of prepping this time. The Clash on Sunday. Boy, that was a doozy. Lots of single file, high line dominance, Penske cars strong as always, rain. And then to add icing on the cake, we junked almost the whole field, and then it rained again. This package just screamed 2013 all over again, really. It just seemed to be so hard to pass. And I don't think it was a lack of trying. Like, you saw guys making moves on the inside. It was just you couldn't keep a group of cars down on the bottom for so long. And it showed because you jump up to the top and you just stayed there. And it took a really a bonsai move, I guess you could call it, by Jimmy Johnson, a last-ditch effort to thread the needle, and it caused the wreck, and it, junked all but, I think, 4 cars.
Yeah, I think there was only like 4 cars that were actually clean after that accident, so, not really a good look for NASCAR right now going into the next couple races of Speed Weeks here.
Right.
I guess one thing you can take away from it is if you get enough cars lined up on the bottom, you can make a little bit of ground up for maybe a lap or 2, but it's only enough to move you up maybe like 1 or 2 positions. So we could see that come into play at the end of the Daytona 500 if this package does race like it did for the Clash. We may see, a couple Ford drivers at the end of the race gang up on a Chevrolet driver and then make their way to the front by just jumping down to the bottom with 3 or 4 guys and just freight training the leader.
Right. Now, I think there's really 2 ways you can look at this, a pro and a con. And some people will see this as a pro, but I don't. You're going to see a lot of side drafting, I think, in the 500, which, side drafting is a part of plate racing. That's part of the game. But I think what we saw from Jimmy Johnson and Paul Menard, it seems that this car, when you try to side draft somebody, it pulls the car that is being side drafted in, and it basically pulls those 2 cars together with how the airflow is. Because really, Menard moved down really late, and Jimmy kind of seemed like he got sucked into Menard. So you can't blame one guy or the other. It was just the product, I think, of the racing and going for the win. I don't think you could really fault either driver. It just happened. But I think that's one negative I think you could put on this is side draft is really going to hurt these cars, I think. And then I think the pro you can take away from this package is right before Jimmy Johnson made that move coming onto the backstretch, he backed up to Kurt Busch's bumper, and they got a run off turn 2, and that's what allowed Jimmy to have the run to even pull out, because we saw guys just pull out and couldn't go anywhere. But Jimmy had a run from Kurt, and I think if you see guys back up to each other's bumpers and get a run on the leader, then maybe we'd see passing. But that's obviously still unknown since it was just a non-points race.
Yeah, well, I honestly, if there's any one thing I can bring out of the Clash, it's that I think that Jimmy Johnson is the greatest strategist of all time. I mean, to junk the field and then have it rain, the cognitive ability that he had available to do that in the middle of the race is just unbelievable to me. I mean, it really and truly impressed me, and it saved the race, in my opinion, because God knows I was having the worst time watching that up until the point where I started laughing, because it's just one of those things you have to laugh at. It's like the Mossport finish last year in trucks. I mean, what else are you supposed to do? Or the second to last restart at the Roval, where they just all went, I forgot what track they were at and just went straight. I mean, some things, you just gotta laugh at. I mean, that was honestly one of the most boring NASCAR races I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. It's up there with Michigan 2015 Indy that year. Yeah, no, it's definitely up there. But I mean, it doesn't bode well for the rest of Speed Weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised to see NASCAR change the package for next year, because remember, the Daytona 500 is the only race using this package. Every other track is on the regular big tapered spacer, big spoiler package. Right. So I'm going to be very interested to see what NASCAR decides to do for next year, whether or not they want to keep the cars hard to drive at Daytona. Because I don't really know the solution to what we see, because we've seen it for so long, ever since Daytona and Talladega both got repaved. I mean, I think it's just a product of the repaves at this point, and the quality of asphalt that they used. Right. It's going to take another 10, 15 years before they can get it to where you can't run that top line, or else you're going to be in the wall, and tire wear is going to come back. But I think that's really what it's going to take to improve these plate races, because the last, ever since, I can't even remember how long ago.
2013, really, ever since Gen 6 was introduced, I think we've seen a completely different beast on the restrictor plate races. We had our, fair share of good races in 2013 on the restrictor plates, but once these teams figured out the cars, I think we saw something completely different. And, I think that's a good segue into our next piece is, the qualifying. And Hendrick figured out the cars once again. I mean, they've been on top of it for how many years now? I think since 2015 they've had a car on pole for the
front row.
Yeah, they've had a car on the front row since 2015 for the Great American Race, at the least. I mean, That's incredible,
And
honestly.
they swept the top 4. Byron gets his first pole. It's Chad Knaus's first pole with William Byron. It is, gosh, I mean, and it's crazy when you think about this because William Byron and Chad Knaus, their first match together. Jimmy Johnson and Kevin Meendering, their first race together was the Clash, and they won that. Byron on pole, that it's just crazy to think that these mix-ups you still got these guys on top.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just, the cream rises to the top, and that's kind of what happened. And not to mention, not only did Hendrick sweep the top 4, they swept it by about 2/10 of a second over 5th place. I think it was Tyler Reddick. Or no, I'm sorry, Daniel Hemrick. I'm sorry, I always get those guys confused. But yeah, it was over 2/10 of a second back to
which is
Hemrick.
Insane on a plate track.
Yeah, on a plate track, 2/10 of a second. That's like blowing the doors off of them. That's insane.
Yep.
And to do that completely clean, no less. I think the only issue I think they had in pre-qualifying inspection was the 9 car had an issue in the in the inspection there, and his car chief has been ejected for the remainder of speed weeks. And again, another good segue into our next segment here of the new rules. If it wasn't for the new rules, his car chief would have still been with the team, but
right.
They ejected him right on the spot, and, if that was to happen during the race, that's going to disqualify him straight up.
Bob Pockris and Jeff Gluck both did a great job of covering these rule changes, and they've tweeted about it quite a bit. But I think to summarize, and it made NASCAR fans, I think, really excited over this. If you win the race and your car is illegal, you will not keep the win. The winner gets disqualified if his car is illegal, and you're going to know by the end of the night. So before you leave the track, you're going to know who wins the race. So that's a plus for NASCAR fans. It's not going to be something where they take it back to the R&D center and you find out on Tuesday. You're going to find out on Sunday, or if the race is ran on Saturday, you're going to find out who the winner of the race is on that day.
If you want a hot take from me, I'm not sure how long this is going to last, because I'm sure I'm supportive of it. I've been supportive of it for a while. I'm perfectly happy with taking away wins for cheating. But with the way the fan base is right now, I really wonder what happens when a Chase Elliott or a Jimmy Johnson or, a Kyle Busch gets their win taken away. And the reaction's obviously going to be negative, because NASCAR has made this change, and then, heaven forbid it affect one of their most popular drivers, and heaven forbid, it happened during speed weeks and someone fails inspection post the Daytona 500.
Yes. Or during the playoffs.
Exactly, because that's going to throw a whole wrench into everything. And I really honestly, truly believe that this may not last very long. I think it's a great thing, but I'm not sure how the fan base is going to react the first time it comes into play.
Right. So speed weeks. We've ran the Clash. We've ran the ARCA race. We've got the duels on Thursday. We've got the Truck Series on Friday night. Xfinity on Saturday, and the Daytona 500 to cap it all off on Sunday. We're going to do a little bit of predictions. See who do you guys got? Break it down. We'll go trucks first. Who do you guys got taking home the win on Friday night? Start with Vic.
That's a tough one. Honestly, I think the favorite going into it is the past champion, of course, of Brett Moffitt. But then again, he hasn't always been strong on the plate tracks. So I think you could actually look at maybe somebody like Johnny Sauter starting up with ThorSport now, going over to I think it's going to be the 98 machine next year. Actually, maybe the 13. I'm not quite sure on that, but he will be at ThorSport.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a bet on that it's going to be an absolute wreckfest. I think there are going to be 2 cars running at the finish. It's going to be Travis Kvapil versus Corey Roper, side by side to the line. Corey Roper edges out Travis Kvapil for the win. That's what I'm betting on.
Oh boy.
Man.
Campbell, you're no short of hot takes tonight. In all seriousness though, I think it's going to be somebody like, Todd Gilliland, I think, or like Vic said, Brett Moffitt. I think those are 2 pretty safe bets. You usually see, we saw Todd Gilliland run at the front at Talladega last year in the truck race. We saw him run near the front at the end of the ARCA race. I think it's a fair bet to see him up there. And Brett Moffitt is the reigning champion. He's won on basically every type of track there is except for a road course and a super speedway. So he's got those 2 to knock out, and I think he could do it on Friday night. The Xfinity Series goes to Daytona as well on Saturday. Vic, who do you got, buddy? Who's going to win it?
Man, that's going to be a tough one, but, we got Chase Elliott taking the 8 for that race for Dale Jr., the debut of the 8, or, well, actually more of the reintroduction of the 8 in the Earnhardt name, fielding it, and I think that's going to be the guy who's going to win. I think it's going to be Chase Elliott, but don't be surprised if another Earnhardt is up near the front, and that would be, of course, Jeffrey Earnhardt with his new deal with Joe Gibbs Racing. I think he's going to be running as well, if I'm not mistaken. So don't be surprised if he's up near the front as well.
That's definitely going to be somebody to keep an eye on. And people for years said, all right, is he going to get an opportunity? When's he going to get a good opportunity? This is his opportunity. We'll see how he does with it. Zach Campbell, what you got, buddy? Who's winning on Saturday in the Xfinity Series?
One interesting thing to note is that the people who led the most laps in the Xfinity race last year, actually, were Kyle Larson and Joey Logano. Combined, they led 89 out of the eventual 143 laps, although that was with 5 overtimes. But they led a majority of the laps, and neither in the race this year, with Chip Ganassi shutting down their Xfinity program and Austin Cindric being in the 22.
There's a guaranteed wreck.
Yeah, third most laps led ended up actually being Chase Elliott. Honestly, I have to go Brad Keselowski. I think he is currently the best plate racer in Cup. And I really do think that he has a very good shot at winning this race, just because of his knowledge. And the depth of field, this year around, I don't think is as strong as it has been in years past. And so I think it'll be very interesting just to see where he is compared to everybody else. And I honestly do have him down as the winner.
I got to go with, man, that's tough. Tyler Reddick won it last year. I think he's got a great shot at winning again. It's hard to not bet on Chase Elliott just because he's won the race before. Junior Motorsports has won, they won with Reddick. They've won with Chase before. They've won with Regan Smith before. They've won other plate races in the Xfinity Series. It's hard to bet against them. I got to go with Chase Elliott. The Daytona 500, which is probably the most anticipated race of the weekend, obviously. Gosh, this is gonna be. I think this is a tough one to pick. Vic, who do you got?
You know what? Honestly, I think you got to go with the hot hand, Jimmy Johnson. I think already he's got the momentum rolling on his side, starting starting second in the first Gatorade duel of the week. I think he's going to be very strong in that race. I think he may actually win it, and he may be the first driver in the history of all of Daytona, in the Daytona 500 history, to sweep the duel, the Clash, and the 500 in the same year.
That would be pretty incredible, honestly. We've never seen that happen. Definitely don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Still got the duels to be ran on Thursday. Mr. Campbell, who do you got? Who's winning the 500 on Sunday?
I think after watching the Clash, as single file as it was, I think it's very hard to bet against 1, the Hendrick Chevys, and 2, the Team Penske Fords. And it would be very boring to pick either of those. And so I'm going to put my money down, and I'm going to say that an RCR car will win the duel and the 500. Now, will that be Tyler Reddick? Will that be Austin Dillon? Will that be Daniel Hemrick? Or will that be Brennan Gaughan? Who knows? But I bet an RCR car will win both of those races.
Okay. I respect it. Before Sunday, I would have never guessed Jimmy Johnson would win the 500. I didn't even have him on my radar, and it's nothing against what he did in 2018. People say he's on the way out. I don't think he's on the way out. I think he's still got unfinished business. I think he's still going to win more races. I think he's definitely on a lot of people's radar now. Personally, I think when they release the odds of who has the best shot at winning the 500, Keselowski was the highest. So to me, Brad Keselowski is the guy you got to watch out for. Ryan Blaney, though, the last 2 years has led laps in the 500. Most notably, 2018 was a strong performance. He dominated the 500. Was running up at the front late in the 2017 500 as well. So he's a guy that you got to keep an eye on. But if I got to pick one out of everybody, I got to go with Keselowski. Brad Keselowski is going to win your Daytona 500 on Sunday. So that does it for the first episode of the Pit Limiter podcast. Thanks to my co-hosts, Victor Valley and Zach Campbell, for joining me. I'm Zach Buchanan. We'll see you guys next week. Goodbye, everybody.